Hi everybody, this is Kent from Man About Tools, and in this episode I'm building an extension on the back side of this workshop. I need more space to fit out my woodworking shop, so we decided on a shed extension off this back wall. The idea is to move all the wood and hardware storage from my shop into this shed, so this will free up floor space in the shop to make it more functional. I also plan to install my dust vacuum system in this extension and pipe the ductwork through the wall, and this should make for a slightly quieter workspace. This shed extension will have a concrete foundation, concrete paver floor, 2x4 walls, 2x6 rafters, an entry door, matching metal roof, and some corrugated metal and cedar walls. So in this episode, I'll excavate, build forms, pour a foundation, and install a concrete paver floor over compacted gravel. I'll use some boards and spray paint to mark the grass. Then I'll cut into the sod with an edger along this line. Then cut lines north to south and then east to west. The floor space is approximately 7.5 by 14 feet. Headspace will be a bit low as I'm running the rafters off the wall below the soffit. I want to keep the rain gutter as is, as it feeds the rainwater tank that sits beside the shed. Cutting the grass into cubes made the digging much easier. It took a few hours over 2 days to clear the sod and topsoil and roughly level the site. But a small excavator or tractor with a backhoe would be much better and way more fun. Maybe one day. This sod and topsoil is heaped into piles, and when it breaks down we'll add some more organic material and compost for more garden beds in the next few years. The next day, Marilyn came by to help haul the sod away. I was moving a bit slower that second day, but we got it done. We shoveled in a yard of 3/4 inch crushed stone and raked it flat and then packed it down a bit. The tarp in the bed of the truck really helps with getting the last bit of gravel out. I just wanted to get a fairly flat and level surface at this point, and so the forms would sit right down over the packed gravel without any gaps. I found there's less concrete waste this way. The woodworking shop is all part of a multi-year project on our property. More on that later in future episodes. I'll be reusing the 1x8s from the curb walls of the rainwater tank installation from last year. I'm glad I bought a load of this lumber back when it was much cheaper. These 1x8s are stacked and screwed together with vertical 2x4s. And for more strength, there's a pair of horizontal 2x4s screwed to them. This is the basis of my form walls. The existing shed has very shallow foundation walls, and with our mild winters, I think it's been okay for the decades it's been here. Nothing appears to have heaved or shifted, so I'll follow that. So my foundation will only be a few inches below grade. The land here slopes down toward the rainwater tank, so I designed the foundation wall to be 15 inches tall. The existing shed has 2x4 walls and a 5-inch thick foundation wall, so I'll copy that on this extension. I'm not a professional form maker, so I just do the best I can here. All this lumber will be used either in forms for an upcoming greenhouse foundation or in the carpentry of this shed extension. So I like to use screws for all my work here. I'll set each wall in place and temporarily clamp them at the corners. Here I used a 1x2 and some layout string to estimate my roof line and how much clearance I'd have for the door. And as it turns out, it's not going to be much. I'll need to cut my door and frame down a few inches so it will clear the rafters. But I figured this is okay as I won't be doing much with this space beyond storage. And I need to cut a section from these two form walls for the doorway step through. I figured it would be easier to do this after I had the form walls built. As I was positioning the forms, I was checking for square corner to corner. The 3 outer form sections were positioned, squared, and leveled first, and some stakes and braces added. I spread some vegetable oil on the inside of the forms to keep the concrete from sticking. I cut spacer blocks the thickness of my foundation, and those helped setting my inner walls in place. I made a complete series of videos for my 2 rainwater tank installations last year. I go into more detail of the form building and pouring of the concrete curb walls for the base of those tanks. I'll post a link to that series here. And now I can add all the inner stakes and braces. The new foundation wall will be tied into the existing walls with some rebar. I drilled some 1/2-inch holes into the existing wall and then tapped in the rebar. On the south end, I bent the rebar so it would run down and across the threshold of the door. Some of the holes I just couldn't drill deep enough in this old concrete, so I ended up drilling a few more to get the 2 that I needed for the rebar. Guess I hit some rocks in the concrete that my hammer drill couldn't get past. I bent the rebar by sliding it inside 2 pieces of pipe. This worked well and made for sharp 90-degree bends. The rebar is hung from tie wire, and anchor bolts are held in place by these 1x2 braces. You can see some of my spacer blocks still in place as I work on bending and hanging the rebar. I hung the spool of the tie wire from a sawhorse. This kept it from becoming a tangled mess and made unspooling easier. And around this point, after working on this for a few days, I started to wonder how much more effort would be needed to just build a new shop from scratch. Then I thought about the current price of lumber, and that idea disappeared. Hanging the rebar did take quite a bit of time to finish. It's just fiddly work. But this is the time to get it right, as once you start pouring concrete, you really can't change anything or fix any mistakes. I've learned this the hard way. I've discovered that I probably fuss over form work more than I really need to, and that's probably because I just don't do this very often, and then tend to overdo it. Here's the forms finished and now ready for concrete. In several spots, I wired the form walls together to keep them from bowing under the weight of the concrete. And this was done by drilling 1/8 holes in the form walls and making a loop through them with tie wire. Here's the rebar suspended and centered from the tie wire. And this wire attached to these cross supports that also hold the sill plate anchor bolts in place. Our local big box orange building supply store had mixed bags of concrete on sale, so I picked up just over 30 bags. I found it's easier on the back to load the concrete mixer from bags right off the bed of the truck. This is a small mixer, so I load it with the drum vertical and start it spinning before I tilt it. It can just handle 2 bags at a time, but this was fine for this size of pour. When mixed, I rotate the drum around to the other side and into a wheelbarrow. I was roughly measuring my water in pails before adding it to the mixer. I found this really helped me dial in just what I needed for a good smooth mix, not too dry and not too sloppy. I did make an improvised stand to elevate the mixer, and this helped me get the drum to a better height for loading bags from the truck, and it gave more clearance for the wheelbarrow. Marilyn helped with shoveling and pouring the wet concrete into the forms. She used a 1x2 to help settle the concrete, and pressed a bladeless reciprocating saw against the form to vibrate it and bring bubbles up to the surface. When we got into a rhythm, the pour went pretty fast. The screws holding the rebar tie wires were removed as we were filling the forms. We pushed these ends into the wet concrete as the rebar didn't need support anymore. The concrete itself would hold the bars in place while it was hardening. It was forecast to rain that afternoon, so we had to work quickly, and we got it done and troweled smooth just as the rain started, and hastily covered the wet concrete with plastic just in time. Within minutes, I'd say, so we were lucky. My favorite step comes next. After a few days, I stripped the forms to reveal the finished foundation walls. I started by removing the nut and washer from the anchor bolts and the cross support that tied the top of the forms together. Then I removed the braces and cut the tie wires that were holding the bottoms of the form together, and the rest of the walls came free without too much struggle. Now I added more 3/4 crushed stone and leveled this. I wet this gravel down along with the fresh concrete and covered the wall under tarps for a few days before I could get back to this project. I got a deal on some concrete block caps, and I figured they would do fine for this floor. However, my savings in dollars turned into more work than I expected. So to prep the floor for these caps, I rented a plate compactor to settle the crushed stone. And over that, I'll add a layer of finer crushed stone. I laid in half-inch metal conduit and leveled them end to end and side to side. I weighed these pipes with blocks, then dumped some of the 3/8 crushed stone to one end. I screed this level using a 2x4. This gave me a reasonably flat and level surface to lay the concrete caps on. When I remove a pipe, I can fill the gap with more crushed stone and use a trowel to smooth it. It helps to keep this layer of stone damp, and it keeps the dust down, and it seems to compact better. I cut the concrete with a diamond blade on my angle grinder. These were dry cut, and they did create a load of dust. I luckily didn't have many cuts to make. I marked each cut on both sides of the cap and cut about a half-inch deep. Then I tapped the concrete with a mallet to break it along this line. These block caps are not designed to be pavers, as they have flat sides without the notching of pavers, so I needed to add spacers as I laid them, and this just took more time. And it happened to be a scorching hot day when I laid these. And if I was going to do this again, I'd just use regular pavers instead of these caps. It took a couple of hours to lay this floor. I tapped each paver with a rubber mallet to set it into the crushed stone. With the cuts done, Marilyn came to pull all the plastic spacers. I dumped some sand onto the floor and swept it into the gaps, then ran the plate compactor over it. The passes with the compactor made the sand quickly disappear into the cracks. I think I swept, then compacted about 3 times in total. I also sprayed water onto the finished floor to settle the sand and lock the caps in place. So in the next episode, we'll finish the carpentry, and we may need to remortgage the house to buy the lumber. We'll see how that goes. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.